Okay, let's all please welcome Richard. He's here from London for us for this talk, and he's going to be talking about scaling contents on sports websites.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure. I think this is the first time I've seen Fahad in about 6-7 years ago. And I'll tell you that little story about how I found out about him later. But I'm a software engineering manager at DAZN. I am a software engineer as well, so I don't just talk the talk. I like to walk a little bit. And I'm a big fan of ES5. ES5 people. I actually love it back then a lot more than now, perhaps. Even though the new language is all sexy and everything, I just absolutely loved the fluidity that you could just smash up out something and start typing some JavaScript and it was alive, and I love that. I live in Leeds in the UK, even though our head office is in London, and I lived in Japan for 15 years. So this is actually how I came to know about Fahad. And even though I don't think I've ever been with you, he's never been. However, I was at a community event probably about 4 or 5 times the size of this. And someone was saying, yeah, there's this kid that's been writing that, like you were 16 back then or something. Is it about that? You were like crazy. You're crazy young now, aren't you? But you were crazy young then. This is 10 years ago. And it's part of the PHP community. Am I allowed to say that you once wrote PHP? We're all friends here.
He was.
He's come up with CMS and he's really tuning it out there. So it's absolutely amazing to see you doing some fantastic things here in Amsterdam. And at the moment, I'm kind of helping out with the Amsterdam office a little bit. And I actually went to Brazil with some of Leonardo, and I hear that some of you are from Brazil. Yeah, it was an amazing time. It was really good. I loved spending some time with the Brazilian people, which we kind of went out to hire some, and so we came back with 5 more Brazilians than we went with, which was really good. But anyway, they're a lot of fun, but they're not really what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about sports and working with sports websites and various companies that offer these kinds of sports products. So I have worked at these places or worked with them, sometimes consulting, sometimes actually in the trenches writing some code. And I just kind of want to take us on a little bit of a journey. So I love nostalgia. I'm an old guy here. I'm really glad that Maurizio is a little bit older than me, because it makes me feel a little bit better. He is a year older than me, so I am pleased about that. But anyway, I digress. This is kind of how sports websites started. So I don't know if any of you looked back at websites when they were like this. Yeah, it was awesome, wasn't it? It was an awesome time, and I don't know what this is about. Is it some kind of old website? I don't know. This is actually the Euro '96 official website. It's not Fahad doing this in his bedroom, you know, when he was 16 years old. This is actually a serious company offering a major branded website, and it's not just there. This is actually 1996 official Olympics website. It's not actually that long ago. It's like 20 years ago. You know, and it needed some serious idea power to power it. You know, they probably spent hundreds of millions of euros to get this thing live and scaled and working. And it probably had some really lame content that no one was really interested in. But sports draws us in, and we love to see scores, we love to see stats, we love to know what's going on, we need to feel part of the action. And this is what all of the various sports websites were trying to do. And what was great is that, you know, it didn't always carry on getting better. It kind of got a bit better, and then other sites made it a little bit worse. Manchester United, the richest football club in the world. This is their website. And what's we're doing on the side.
We're missing a bit how it loaded, like the image would go.
Oh yeah. It's unbelievable. And I'll tell you the amazing good thing about these sort of sites is these are the reason I became a web developer. I was like, I can do better than that. You know, I was no great artist, but yeah, these were kind of shocking. But we started picking up and we started getting serious. And in the UK, the BBC is the iconic brand for doing journalism and doing journalism at scale on a level that could be considered the benchmark of worldwide journalism. And so I've often looked at the BBC to say, how are they doing their stuff? And it's still quite old and it's a bit it's not very vibrant. The scores are hand edited, they're put in by a journalist, potentially being uploaded with server-side includes. Does anyone remember them? You know, and put up on an FTP server and pulled into the site. That's probably how that website actually worked under the bonnet. I kid you not. Yeah. And then here we've kind of got to a place where they've upped their game. They've realized it needed investment. They've realized that we need to be on the front foot. We need to be getting more live action in front of users, including scores and rich imagery. But it can't stop there. And this was a big moment for the BBC. In 2012, in February, they launched this, and this was actually called Yellowgate. It was a big, shocking moment because everyone hated it because of the yellow. They're like, hey, it's not yellow. But now, when you associate BBC Sport, you associate it with yellow. So it was a great marketing campaign, and this was what it looked like when it launched. It was using some really horrible template engine that I inquired about making changes to, and they just said, look, don't do that. Just stop there. Just don't do that. You can change the templates, obviously, but I was advised heavily not to. So next is, come on, clicker, the mobile website. So they realized, hey, mobile phones, they're picking up. That's a big thing. So let's make a mobile website as well. And they had two websites, one for the mobile and one for their front end and for their desktop users. And it was quite good. It was still quite cutting edge. We knew about making things sort of responsive, but we didn't go there. So it's similar to how you can make things isomorphic on the front and back end, but we don't always go there. We sometimes shy away from it because we don't like to go too far out of our comfort zone. But we knew we could. And the reason that we knew we could, and I think I've skipped a slide here, is because of this project. And this was the time to be at the BBC because everyone thought that the Olympics were going to fail. Because, hey, what runs on time in the UK? The trains don't run on time. How on earth can they put on this major sporting event? And this app was the reason that I joined the BBC. So we created this for multiple devices. It looked quite good then. It looks a bit dated now. But this was actually a JavaScript app running inside what was a phone app. And we had our own native features on it. So this was native, that was native, that was native. And the iPhone version actually looked a lot more native than that. It was just basically the JavaScript on the front end interacting with the native components. So it was a really great way of diving into JavaScript and making it fluid. We did some cool stuff. So we made this in 4 months. We had the mobile website that we pulled in. And we started this in February. The Olympics were in August, and we knew that come July, we needed to go from 0 to 2 million people on 2 platforms, have it running live for maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and then go all the way back to 0 again. So the first feature that I wrote for that was kill switch. How do you turn the app off again? So that's the very first feature that we put in there. But at this point, by doing this in JavaScript and realizing that you could do tons of cool stuff that they hadn't done yet, so who uses service workers yet? So, you know, not everyone's using them, but they're out there, they're great, they're a great opportunity to take and use. And when you've got like a app that's almost like a single page app because it's always running in memory, that's a great opportunity to use service workers, right? But that's also why we started saying, well, actually, we wanted all the second and third page content to be all stored locally. So when we store that locally, we can access it even when you're offline. And so that was our way of thinking, well, how does this app work at scale? And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So then we go through all of that, you know, websites, responsive, you all know that stuff. It's kind of obvious now, but it was a real fun, exciting time to be at the BBC and be part of that journey. But this is probably the singularly most exciting in how it shifted the way that we thought about delivering sports data to consumers. So we wanted everything to go to the consumer as real time as possible. So it was all hooked up with WebSockets. We had Socket.io at the back. We realized that, hey, we can't do this on the 150 servers that they have that are sitting there just to deploy PHP and Java apps into. We need AWS. So we worked out that, hey, in one small instance of EC2, we could actually deliver live connections to 5,000 users very, very comfortably. We could probably hit 8 or 9, but we wanted to stay comfortable, so we actually had to scale up those servers for the amount of people that were accessing it at that time. And so it's interesting problem because you get people joining quicker than what AWS can spin them up. So you've kind of got to keep more in reserve. And that's an interesting, fun challenge. And that's what we thrive on, is challenges like that. And then what was really fun was that you actually had the same challenge the other way. It's actually harder to scale down than it is to scale up. So that's really interesting because you've still got people connected to this EC2 instance whilst you're actually wanting to kick them off and push them onto another one. So we had to do tons of cool stuff on the back end to say, hey, if you're still connected to a stale server, I'm going to kick you off and push you on to one of the healthy ones, which was really exciting. But this was so effective that we realized, hey, let's do this for all of our websites. We should make them all live. We should make them all interactive. So we made this page, and that was kind of part of the Glastonbury pages. It was part of the BBC Three ones, and then even also BBC News. And this is still a staple of the BBC News offering. So, you know, this is 2 days ago. Really bad news. I was saddened by this. But it's using the same kind of technology. But it's been changed a little bit over time. And this is where our talks will start to cross over really strongly, because what we did was we created this in Angular. It was probably the first kind of SPA as the BBC realized it, and they were really willing to invest in it. And at that time, Webpack didn't exist, I think, did it exist in 2013? If it did exist, we didn't know it existed because we had to kind of create our own Webpack to be able to do this in so many different mediums. But we really had to bundle our own CSS together, we had to bundle our own JavaScript together, and we had to minify it and all that stuff. So we had to be thinking about how to be performant from the outset. And the first version of this was really slow, and it was really horrible. And you know, two-way binding is evil. Why didn't we know that back then? But this is kind of how we started to re-architect away from Angular and into React. And it's very similar to what you were sharing around okay, we know we have these parts of the page, and these very much need to be, because it's the BBC, you can't just have it in JavaScript, because it needs to be available to screen readers, it needs to be available to BlackBerry users, even Internet Explorer users, and you know, user base is what they look at. That's how they scale. That's how they want it to be accessible to everyone. So in the first Angular version, we had a cut the mustard test. Anyone heard of that? There's a cut the mustard, and it's basically a very small bit of JavaScript that says, are you a modern thing? If you are a modern thing, I will give you, or you know, if you are a modern browser, I will give you my modern version. If you are not, I'll give you the PHP version. And so we actually had to write an Angular app and a PHP app at the same time, almost mirroring exactly like they did. It was a lot quicker to write the PHP app, in all fairness. It was shoddy, but it was a lot quicker to write. So we had to think about how that was all cut down. And we needed to then say, well, actually, we shouldn't be writing two versions. That's like writing two websites all over again. We want to be writing one. So that's why we started looking at server-side rendering. First of all, we did it with Ruby, and then React came out. And we're like, wow, this is great, because we can render it server-side and client-side, and we can do what we want to do with this. And that's why we started to set up a system that was very similar to what was just presented. So we'd have what we called nano services, and this project's called Project Morph, in case you want to find out more about it. I don't know if you can. I don't know if there's many articles on it. But we split up the articles, and each orange box highlights part of the page created by nano services. And what we had was we had EC2 instances that were running and scaling up, and we didn't use lambdas because of the cold start problem, because BBC content hangs around for a long time. And that's why when you say scaling web's front end, it seems like it's really obvious, easy thing, but it's not, because if you have millions and millions of pages of content, and you have millions and millions of different ways that they're built up. So, for example, this section might exist in another page, and that might live on another page. And then tomorrow, that will be a different set. And so you add all of those possibilities together, and they start multiplying. And the amount of cache keys that you actually need to hold to serve all of those. And this is where we started to find this was starting to stop scaling. So this is still in production at the BBC now, and it's still growing, and it's still big. It's getting slower. And it's like they're struggling to keep up with the scale of this. And they've asked, you know, myself and a bunch of other friends, hey, can you come back, because we need to re-architect this because of how it's done. There's just too much old content that if we want to regenerate it, it's what basically this page, all server-side rendered, but it's getting its services from different parts of the BBC. It can take 2 or 3 minutes to render. And they let the first person that accesses it take the hit. So the first person that hits it, it's like, okay, this content needs to be warm. But it takes 2 or 3 seconds 2 or 3 minutes to warm up. So it's warming up in the background while everyone's trying to hit it. With fresh content, it's fine, right? Because it's cached that day as it's loaded in. They warm the cache on the fresh content. But if you get stuff from like a year ago, it's going to be cold, and it might not serve you on time.
What happens if someone knows that and basically asks for all the content from like a year ago?
Yeah, it just carry on keeping that warm. It'll be one user. It's got enough EC2 compute behind it just to say, hey, okay, I just need to spin up more, and that's fine. It spin them up and spin them down, and it's fine with that. It's just when it's got to spin it up now, that's when it starts becoming a problem. So yeah, this is all Node.js, all written with quite old ES5 code. I think they've changed that now to ES6. I left 2 or 3 years ago, so they've probably moved on a little bit. But there was that side which was the whole back-end way of serving front-end content that we're kind of interested in, and that's the conversation we've had. But also there's the front-end way of thinking that we massively needed some thought over. So I think you mentioned about the consistency of the CSS or the consistency of the styling or consistency. In BBC, what they did, and this is a very clever chap, if he's ever in Amsterdam, please hire him. He is amazing. But he got the BBC core foundation CSS to 9K. And that ended up being the base of every single one of their pages. And that's how they got that consistency but it's not technical. It is partly technical to get it that small, but it's really about organization. How do you organize your structure so that they will all use that and they will value that and they will treat that as an important part of the puzzle. And part of what allowed them to do this, and this is becoming a trendy word now, isn't it? About having a design system. So Gel has been around for ages, and it was always the core of the BBC that whenever you put BBC branding out there, it has to look like this. It has to, if it's on print, this is how many millimeters it needs to be for this, that, and the other. It needs to have this much width around the border, and there was just guides that we went to and looked at. But they put that into a CSS toolkit, was 9K brilliant, and that helped them to do that. But it requires a lot of time. It takes a lot of working together as teams and saying, hey, I'm actually going to invest into this. But on the other hand, you've got Japanese websites. Sorry, gomenasai ne. This is NHK Sports website, and this is it yesterday. It's quite modernish content. This is how responsive it is. Not at all. Yeah, I don't think that's responsive at all. So people are still struggling with this simple stuff, right? And NHK have actually said, hey, come and to the Olympics. If you wanted a job doing the Olympics site in Japan, you could talk to me and we could go and do it, but I'd probably rather not. I think they're running like PHP 5.1 or something, and it's like, yeah, I'm just not going to go near that. It's just, I cannot do that. I'm sorry. But their way of scaling websites, and they're the equivalent of the BBC in Japan. I'm not talking about some rubbish little shop, but each of these areas, as you go to them, they will go to a different company, making them a whole fresh new website with that. And, it's not even using the same Kubernetes cluster. So there's no consistency at all. It's different color of blue everywhere. It's different color of red. They're different size fonts. Some of them are like way pixelated on the logos. And this is all stuff they don't know about. They don't think about. So some people still find that a challenge, but they do manage to scale it out in some way. It's just very poorly. But what way are you needing to scale your website? So we talked about a lot of different ways of scaling. What is your way of scaling? Because everyone said, design, micro front ends. Is that the scale that you're looking for? Is that the scale that you're wanting? Is that the problem you're trying to solve? So let's think about the problem that you're trying to solve. Are you wanting to be global? Is that the problem that you're trying to solve? Because you don't have that problem in Japan. You don't need to. You're only attracting Japanese people. The BBC is trying to be global. DAZN is trying to be global. Do you need to be global? Because this has an effect on the answer of how you need to scale stuff. And I'll explain why. Welcome to the Ukraine. While you're here, calls back to the UK will be £2 per minute. To receive a call, it will be £2 per minute. Texts are 50p to send and free to receive. Data is £7.20 a megabyte. That means that the average web page will cost you £12. You know, there's the story of the Olympian who was doing Pokemon Go in Brazil in the Olympics, and he had thousands of pounds of telephone bill. We still hear it now. I was talking to someone, hey, yeah, someone took their mobile phone to Brazil. Just like, hey, off we go. We need to think about that. If you want to be global, think about your bandwidth. Think about if that's the way that you need to scale and make your website scalable. So, is it memory? Major website here, this happens. This web page is using significant memory. Closing it may improve the responsiveness of your Mac. Hey, I've got 16 gigs of RAM, what's the problem? But it happens even now. You need your websites to be memory efficient, right? Do you need it to be accessible? Do you need your websites think of the millions of people? Is there millions? I don't think there's maybe a million tourists, something like that. I don't know. But think about how many people might be blind, or how many people might have vision impairments that stop them from able to see your website as it is. You know, you need to look at accessibility. That's an important issue if you want to scale to outside your front yard. And there's, you know, how many cities in Europe with this many people that you're wanting to reach out to? And within all of that stuff, have our websites got out of control? And this maybe should have been the slide that goes after the memory slide, because this is one of the reasons not massive fan of modern JavaScript. You know, they're lovely tools, they're all fun, but hey, found some storage for my node modules folder after running create React app. You know, it pulls down the whole of the internet. We used to laugh at Java, right, for doing that. Actually, Java's super fast on my machine. It's node modules that kills it. Do we need to be resilient? Are we thinking about that going through a tunnel scenario that I mentioned before? And Fastly are a CDN provider, and they gave a talk that said some interesting statistics. 1% of requests for JavaScript will time out. So it's one person out of every 100 that hits your website isn't getting some JavaScript loaded. I think that's significant. 4% won't download your fonts. Okay, web fonts, anyone? You using web fonts? Yeah, 4% of your users won't see them. 9% of users use some form of content blocker. So we need to be aware. We need to think about tunnels. This is the tunnel outside my local railway station. And every day that I used to go to the BBC, I had 2 minutes in this tunnel. Whatever I had downloaded onto that app at that time could be seen through that tunnel. And that's why we spent a lot of effort doing something about it at the BBC, because it's like, hey, you're still online. You can, well, you still got your app open. You can still see content. And with service workers and the like, you can actually maximize that. Does your app have an offline mode? Does it? Are you thinking about that scenario? You know, maybe it's a product question, maybe more than a developer question, but this is areas that I find we're aware of, but we don't tap into, we don't use them. So even though I asked who's aware of service workers earlier, quite a lot of people put their hand up. Who's doing offline content? None. One. Thank you. Well done. I'm not getting at you. I'm just saying there's lots and lots of opportunities out there. There are some solutions to some of these things, like I've mentioned the service worker thing. On the performance side of things, you can see how an average browser downloads its dependencies, and you can see this little waterfall trend here. And that's largely because you can't multiplex requesting to different TCP connections at a time. I think it's like 7 or something. And so the first 7 are all kind of downloaded together, and then it goes to the next and then to the next. But there's something that you can do about this right away, HTTP2. So this is something that you may be using, it may not be. Is there a reason not to use it? Not a massive reason, but a lot of us just shy away from it because it's the unknown ground. But let's really leverage this. So HTTP2 can send multiple requests for data in parallel over a single TCP connection. Great, isn't it? So that same graph is like that. That gets data to your users faster. Let's do it. Minify and gzip any assets. There's no reason not to do this. Yeah, everyone always nods their head, but I'm always astonished when I go into companies and it's like, yeah, that's on the backlog, like, a month or 2 after it's launched, and we've got complaints that our website's slow. So it's important to do that. Reduce DNS lookups. Yeah, we can do that. Prioritize critical parts of the page. All this stuff. This is boring. Lazy load images below the fold. So I'm sure some of you are probably doing this. Degradate gracefully. Those fonts that aren't loading, try loading your app with no fonts. What does it look like? Try loading your app with no CSS. What does it look like? Try loading your app with an old browser. We always test on our machines that we're deving on, 16 gigs of RAM, decent spec machines. What does it look like on a bad machine? And allow for that by degrading gracefully. And use a CDN. Use a CDN. It gets stuff to your client way more quickly and reliably. And if they've got it there already, then when they go and access it again, it'll be there for them, even if they're offline. So how is this going? This is a bit this is probably mostly stolen from Max and Luca, but we are creating this engaging sports experience where we are showing live sport to millions of people at a time, and it's a real interesting scaling challenge that we have. And the problem that we have is not necessarily scaling to people that are offline, because video doesn't matter, does it? Well, it kind of does. It would be nice to be able to use it offline, but you can't see live sport if it's not online. But the challenge that we have is teams. How do we get teams working effectively together? That's what we're really looking at. And the challenge went out to Luca at the beginning that says, think of 100 developers. Think of hundreds of developers. We're already hundreds of developers. So we've got, 80 in Amsterdam now. We've got 40 or 50 in Leeds. We've got 100 in London. We've got 100 in Poland. So how can you do scale when at the moment there's only 2, but there are going to be more, and it's about growth. This is a growth-driven model. If you don't have a growth or a teams problem, maybe micro front ends aren't the problem that you're trying to solve. But we tried to solve similar problem at Sky. So Sky also had hundreds of developers. Once I line manager to like 70 devs in 13 teams, and it was really hard to manage. And there were sort of 10, 15 teams that were working on this website. Don't ask me why you need 10 or 15 teams to build a website, but you do apparently. But their way of doing it was by having this big React renderer, and this was sitting on Heroku, and we just had like 16, 18 instances of their biggest dyno, and we just scaled this whole thing horizontally, and we just chucked in these React components, and you'd have about 250 pull requests open at any one time. you'd have this release train that you'd need to wait till tomorrow until it was your go to go on the release train to see if all your tests had passed and goes through to production. It was CD. It was CD. You couldn't have done it without CD, but it was going all the time. And the builds would take 40 minutes, and you've got like 12 teams. So if 12 teams did a pull request per day, then add the numbers up. It becomes slow. It becomes cumbersome. But the shared components of what some people liked about it, but it was kind of really bulky. But if you have all of this kind of dependency interchangeableness, people complain about meetings, right? Do you hate meetings? Devs often say we've got too many meetings. The reason that you have too many meetings is because you have too many dependencies, right? So dependency hell. And that's what this is trying to deal with. This is what micro front ends are trying to deal with. We got there already with the microservice architecture. This is fairly isolated, right? But they all come to the front end. And then everyone's trying to jump on this, like we were trying to jump on it at Sky. And we had our own kind of solution that we told ourselves that it kind of worked, but it was actually a big monolith. And it took forever to update to the new version of Jest, new version of React. Oh my goodness, it would take a month. It wasn't everyone doing that, but it would. It literally would take people a month to orchestrate all of that and communicating with teams, and someone's changed the font size and it's kind of blown my page out of the water, and they fight over some of the shared stuff. So shared things are a hard thing to do. So you've got the same code base for all team. The communication overhead is like skyrocket. It drives you mad. You end up hating each other. You end up having meetings. You have differences of opinion. The infrastructure, microservices, and DB all sort of autonomous, but the rest isn't. And it's a problem. And this is what they're not telling you about the Spotify model. Our businesses love the Spotify model. They just love this kind of idealism. If these were standalone chapters, that would be fine. But what do these guilds turn into? They turn into sprawling monolithic messes, where one team is trying to communicate with another team. It's all right for these three guys. Oh, I want to engage. This guy's like, nah, not talking to them. They like pink instead of red. I like red, and so you still get communication problems across the teams, even though you've got the guilds that are trying to be a bridge. They're great for sharing tech like this, where we're like, oh, we're sharing our experience, but they're really bad for projects and project management. And this is where micro front ends really help us, because you're owning a domain. That domain is now mine. So I think you alluded to that in your talk as well. By owning that domain from front to back and being able to deploy that independently means that I don't have to fight with another team. I don't have to have a meeting with that other team. I can just do my own stuff and crack on. It's selfish, right? But it works. And what you find is that actually any organization that designs a system will inevitably produce a design whose structure is a copy of that organization's communication structure. So Conway's Law, have you heard of that? Everyone's heard of it, right? So this is where I believe that DAZN is in a great place, because that's a reflection of how our teams talk. Your architecture is a reflection of how your teams talk to each other. Your deployment mechanisms are that. And that's why we very much have a way that we can worry about our business domain. And sure, there's crossovers at times. Sure, there's time when we need to integrate with another. But where possible, we'll deliver a 2 or 3 month project. And we will deliver that on its own. So we're doing, as an example of that, we're doing an SEO project in Leeds right now. So we're writing a whole copy of the whole of DAZN.com just for robots, just for SEO. But we've done it on our own in 2 or 3 months. It's just a static site generator that runs twice a day. They're doing a very similar project in London, which is the same thing for actual users. But I don't need to worry about them. I can just do my thing. I've got AWS, I've got my static site generator, I've got my queues, I've got my Lambdas, off I go. So it's far easier. So what is this kind of share everything, share nothing trade-off? Share everything is idealistic, it's great, businesses love to hear it, but the cost, it's such a high cost because you lose the velocity, you lose how autonomous your teams are. They end up feeling controlled, they're told how to do stuff, and they don't like it. So how does all of this sit together? Those that have heard the talk before, who's familiar with micro front ends? Oh, okay, so basically the thinking is this team could do something in a completely different technology to this. So this team could be doing Vue, this team could be doing React, and this team could be doing Angular. I don't recommend that, don't do that. But you can, right? This team's CSS is not being reused by this team's CSS. They share nothing at all. So they will have a style guide, and they will follow the style guide, and the trade-off is consistency. Yes, it is. Because how this team implements it might be different to how they are. These might be using rems or ems. This team might be using points and pixels. You know, so you might get that. But that's the trade-off we're willing to make in order to reflect the fast pace of change that we're looking at. But you've got that, and it's like, oh, I don't like that. And yeah, we've got 30 shades of grey. We don't have 50. We've got 30 shades of grey on our website. We should actually have 7 shades of grey. We have 30 because of this. But if this team needs to rewrite, very quick. If this team needs to update to the most recent version of React, very quick. You know, it was a month or 2 at Sky, day at most. So the way that that fits together is by an orchestrator, and that orchestrator is our Bootstrap. And that Bootstrap is what kind of pulls everything together. So it's your index HTML just loads the Bootstrap JS, and that says based on the root, based on the user login status, based on where they are geographically, that then pulls down all of the other bundles that it needs for that, and it will pull down the JavaScript that it needs that. And it's quite different to your server-side rendered example. It's all client-side rendered. All client-side rendered. So if you need server-side rendering, that orchestration will be a little bit harder, and maybe that's where Taylor might come into good shape. Yeah.
So say you have more than 3 teams, you have like 10, tens or dozens of them.
We do.
And everyone decides to use a different version of React, a different version of Angular.
Yeah, you can't have that. So you can
must somehow make guidelines, right?
Yeah, so you do make guidelines, and where possible, we align.
That's the guy in Ukraine, we're going to load Ukraine.
Yeah. Because do you want someone using React 14 when someone uses React 16.8? So essentially, you've got to, there has got to be, so just like there's orchestration in the Bootstrap JS, there has to be that little orchestration in the culture side of things as well. That's why we have principal engineers who are there to kind of align some of the teams and the tech and the versions. But when they do ask them to change it, it's very quick. That's the difference. Where before, when you know it's going to be, so say I know I'm going to upgrade to 16.8 of React, and you're on version 16, but you know you're going to have to be doing that work. If all of the teams are doing that in one big monolith, it's like, well, when can I use 16.8 features? Well, you've got to wait 2 months. So whatever you're doing now, you've just got to carry on in your own crappy way and make sure it's compatible with the new version, but you can't use any of its new features.
You prevent whatever happening.
Yep.
2 versions of React.
Yep. Well, we try to. I think that, and maybe that's a question for Leandro and how they might do it. Time, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I would go for. So I try to keep to one and the end and the end of one.
Yeah. You've got to stop that cascading forever because otherwise you've got a huge bundle file. Yeah, stop there. Yeah. And really, we do have a small luxury in as much as these fans are going to be downloading video, so we can afford 200, 300, 400K. For some of your websites that I was talking about earlier, you can't afford that. You can't afford to time out on that. But with ours, our trade-off is we can do that.
But you try to keep your vendor bundle or all the things you're loading, which are not your own code.
Sorry?
So all the things you have, which are not your own code, for example, React or any other framework, you try to keep it at 2 versions or not larger than 2.
Yeah, I guess that's a sensible amount. But yeah, absolutely, two versions would be probably the maximum that I'd expect, just in that transition period. But comms becomes important, culture becomes important in order to communicate, hey, you need to be off that version by a certain date. Yeah. But we had it before with jQuery. Like the BBC downloads like free versions of jQuery. Sky.com, it does. Who else are up to? Who's loading more than one version of jQuery? Okay, what about this question? I love this question. Who's loading Ramda and Lodash?
We have RxJS and Lodash.
Okay, that's better. That's better. What about this one then? Lodash and underscore. Go on.
That's a crime.
Yes, it happens. It's out there. But anyway, user goes to www.thezone.com, bootstrap, and index HTML is returned. Then the bootstrap downloads each of the micro front ends it needs to. So that's the flow. And you mentioned RxJS, but we actually use MobX for sharing state. So there is a sharing layer. So like that question was like to you was like, how do you share state between these apps? This is how we share state. That's the unique thing that we have in everything. That's like, yeah, we talk to each other via that, and it's been great for that. It's been really good for that. And we used to use Redux for that in Sky, which was also good. But this is far better for this use case. So the challenges of scaling front-end applications is about scaling the teams, reducing communication overhead, and maximizing innovation. That's really what we're looking at, and that's why we do what we do, and that's why it works for us. And that's it. Sorry, I don't know if I've been long or short, and it's been boring or fun, but yeah, I've enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Questions for Richard? No? Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Those were two really lovely talks. First with Armando giving us a really deep technical dive, and then Richard giving us a backstory. So before we end, I'd like to invite Edison from Framer because he has some gifts for our speakers. Sure. So here. So first, there's Armando. So if you could come here, please.
Thank you very much.
And then for Richard, yeah.
Thank you. That's super sweet of you. Thank you.
By the way, if the t-shirts don't match, so please feel free to change.
Okay, thank you. That's awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Travix, for hosting us. We see you all next time. Thank you.